So today we're going to talk about this weird little glitch in your memory. It's something that happens every single day, and it totally changes what you remember from, meetings, conversations, and even simple lists.
All right, let's jump right in with a quick memory test. I'm going to flash a list of words at you one by one. Don't worry about writing them down, just try to remember them. You ready? First one up is apple.
Okay, next up, banana. Then we've got cherry, followed by date.
Almost there. Elderberry.
Fig.
And the last one, grape. Got it?
Okay, so think about that list. If I were to ask you tomorrow, which of those words do you really think you'd remember? So I'm willing to bet that apple, the very first word, is pretty clear in your head, right? And grape, the last one, that one probably feels pretty fresh too.
But what about all that stuff in the middle? Words like cherry or date. Yeah, for most of us, those are already getting kind of fuzzy. Or maybe they're just gone.
So, what's going on here? This isn't just you having a bad memory day. Nope, it's a super predictable pattern in how our brains work. And of course, it has a name.
It's called the serial position effect. And what that means, in plain English, is that our brains just love to remember the first and last things they see or hear. Everything in the middle? Not so much.
And this is really cool, actually. The effect breaks down into two separate things. First, you've got the primacy effect. That's why you remember apple. It came first, so your brain had plenty of time and attention to really lock it into long-term memory. Then, on the other end, you have the recency effect. That's why grape is so easy to recall. It's the most recent thing you heard, so it's still just hanging out in your short-term memory, ready to go.
Okay, so that's the science. But how does this abstract little brain quirk actually shape your real life? Well, you'd be surprised. It happens all the time, usually without you even noticing.
Just think about the last long meeting you sat through. You probably remember the first thing on the agenda pretty well, right? And the very last point, the wrap-up, that probably stuck too. But all those important details discussed somewhere in the middle, yeah, they tend to just blur together, don't they?
And this is where it gets kind of serious because it creates this powerful and, let's be honest, totally unfair advantage in competitive situations. I mean, think about job interviews or a bunch of companies giving a sales pitch. The person who goes first and the person who goes last, they have a huge built-in advantage. The poor folks stuck in the middle have to work way harder just to be remembered.
And that really gets to the heart of why this glitch can be so dangerous. It can completely warp our perception of what's important. It makes it seem like timing is more important than the actual content. We end up forgetting critical info and giving people an unfair leg up based on, well, nothing more than when they happen to speak.
So why? Why does our brain do this? Why does the middle of everything get treated like a second-class citizen in our memory?
Well, it really comes down to how our brain's filing system works. Imagine it like this. The first few items get your full, undivided attention. Your brain carefully labels them and files them away in the long-term memory cabinet. The very last items? They're still right there in your hands, your short-term memory, so they're super easy to look at. But all those items in the middle? They get caught in this messy transfer. They're getting bumped around by the old stuff, and they're not new enough to still be in your hand. So poof, they just get lost. Okay, I know this might sound a little bleak, like your memory is doomed to be flawed. But here's the really good news. Just knowing this effect exists is half the battle. You can absolutely take back control.
See, you don't have to just sit back and let this bias run the show. You can totally fight back with some pretty simple strategies. For one, take notes. It forces your brain to pay attention to that middle stuff. Or you can deliberately pause and review what was just said. Give those middle items a fighting chance to sink in. And my favorite, chunking. If you have a long list or a long presentation, just break it into smaller groups. That way, you create more beginnings and more ends, which, as we know, is what our brains love.
And of course, you can flip this around and use it to your advantage. If you have a really critical point you need to make, for goodness sake, don't bury it in the middle of your presentation. Put it right up front or save it for that killer closing statement. Make sure it sticks.
All right, so let's quickly recap the big takeaways here. First, your brain's default setting is to remember the beginning and the end. Second, this little bias affects almost everything: meetings, how you judge people, conversations. The middle part of any sequence is always the weakest link in your memory chain. But, and this is the important part, you can totally overcome this with simple tricks like taking notes.
So that leaves us with one final big question to think about.
We know our memory isn't democratic, it definitely plays favorites, so knowing that, how are you going to make sure that what's important is decided by the content itself and not just where it happened to be sitting in the lineup?